The hunting grounds of Vorith 9 were silent in a way that defied nature itself. Arya Voss had heard the stories. Every spacer worth their salt knew about Vorith 9, a death world where apex predators stacked upon apex predators, where the food chain was a vertical ladder of fangs and claws that stretched into nightmares. The Galactic Council had marked it red zone 50 years ago after a survey team vanished without sending a single distress call. 23 trained xenobiologists, equipped with barriers and pulse weapons, gone in less than 4 hours. Now Arya stood in the heart of that forbidden world, her knees pressed into the moss-covered ground, her bare hands covered in violet blood that wasn't hers. The cub Rick she'd started calling him in her mind whimpered softly. His breathing was shallow, labored. The gash across his flank was deep, inflicted by something with serrated edges. Bone-white fragments of what might have been teeth still embedded in the wound. He was perhaps 3 months old by her estimation, though she had no real reference for the species. 4 eyes, 6 limbs, scales that shimmered between silver and gold. Beautiful, in the way that all young things are beautiful before the universe teaches them cruelty. "Easy," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that moved through the crimson canopy above. "I've got you." She'd been extracting mineral samples 2 kilometers from her landing site when she'd heard the sound. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something primal that transcended language. The translator chip in her skull had offered no words, only raw emotion, pain, fear, abandon. Arya had found Rick in a clearing, dragging himself across the ground with his front limbs while the back ones hung useless. His pack or pride or murder, whatever his species called their family units, was nowhere to be seen. Either they'd left him behind or they'd been killed. On Vorith 9, both scenarios were equally probable and equally cruel. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Arya knew that. She'd signed the waivers, read the briefings, understood that interfering with indigenous species on death worlds could trigger cascading ecological disasters. But she'd also spent 3 years as a field medic during the Centauri conflicts, and some instincts don't fade just because you trade a war zone for the void between stars. She'd carried Rick to a rocky outcrop defensible position, good sight lines, and begun working. Her emergency medkit wasn't designed for alien physiology, but carbon-based life tended towards certain universals. Close the wound, stop the bleeding, prevent infection. The Autodox scanners had whirred and beeped, confused but functional, and Arya had worked by instinct and improvisation, the way humans always had. That's when they'd started arriving. The first predator emerged from the tree line 20 minutes into her work. It was massive, easily 4 meters at the shoulder, with a mane of crystalline spines and eyes that glowed with bioluminescent menace. A Vorath Reaver, according to her suit's database, territorial, aggressive, known to hunt in coordinated packs. It should have attacked immediately. Instead, it stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching. Then came the others. A blade wing circled overhead, its wingspan casting shadows like scythes across the ground. 2 thornback stalkers prowled from the south, their footfalls silent despite their bulk. A void serpent, a creature that supposedly paralyzed prey with psychic screams, coiled around a nearby boulder, its dozens of eyes fixed on the scene before it. Arya had frozen, her hand still pressed against Rick's wound, waiting for the end. Her sidearm was holstered at her hip, but it might as well have been on her ship for all the good it would do against this assembly of nightmares. She'd killed men during the war, too many of them, but these weren't men. These were evolution's cruelest jokes, survival incarnate. But they didn't attack. They simply watched. Arya forced herself to breathe, to think. Her hand resumed its gentle stroking across Rick's head. Between the ridge of bone that might have been ears, or might have been something else entirely. The cub's breathing steadied slightly, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of trust, her gut told her, though she had no evidence to support it. "Good boy," she murmured. "You're doing good." The Vorith Reaver took a step forward. Then, impossibly, it lowered its head. Not in aggression, in something that looked almost like respect. The gesture rippled through the assembly. The blade wing descended to perch on a nearby tree, wings folded. The thornbacks settled onto their haunches. The void serpent's countless eyes dimmed to a soft glow. Arya understood then, in a flash of intuition that transcended species and evolution and the vast gulfs between worlds. These predators, these perfect killing machines, recognized something in her actions. Not weakness. Not prey behavior. Care. On Vorith 9, where every creature was born knowing only hunger and violence, Where survival meant tearing food from still-living bodies and teaching offspring to kill before they could walk, care was alien. It was incomprehensible. A human, a soft-skinned thing from beyond the stars. Tending to wounded prey with no thought of consumption, it violated every natural law this world had written. And they were witnessing it. Arya worked for another hour. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic gel that probably wasn't entirely compatible with Rick's biology, but was better than infection. She sealed it with synthetic flesh that the autodoc synthesized on the fly, guessing at protein markers. She administered a broad-spectrum painkiller that made Rick's eyes glaze but seemed to ease his suffering. Through it all, the predators remained. Silent. Still. Respectful in a way that made Arya's chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. When she finally finished, when Rick's breathing had deepened into something approaching actual sleep, Arya sat back on her heels. Her shoulders ached. Her hands trembled with adrenaline crash, but Rick was alive, and that was enough. She looked up at the assembled nightmares surrounding her clearing. "He's just a baby," she said softly, knowing they couldn't understand her words, but hoping they might understand her tone. "He deserved a chance." The Vorith Reaver made a sound low, rumbling, nothing like its hunting cry. The others responded in kind, calls and clicks and hisses that formed an alien chorus. Then, as silently as they'd arrived, they melted back into the Crimson Forest. Arya carried Rick back to her ship, her weapon still holstered, her heart still pounding. She'd broken a dozen regulations, contaminated an isolated ecosystem, and probably shortened her career by several years. But as she laid the sleeping cub in the medbay and watched his chest rise and fall with steady breaths, Arya Voss smiled. Humans, she thought, had always been very good at breaking rules when those rules forgot to account for kindness. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe bent to acknowledge that.